Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Second biggest game on the slate behind Clemson Notre Dame, and obviously we know what was at stake in this game. Over the last couple years, it's been a de facto SEC East championship game, and in this particular year, it was almost a de facto playoff game, right? The loser of this game now has 2 losses. They're essentially eliminated from the SEC East title race, and they're really eliminated from the playoff race as well. And so we know what happened on the field. Florida dominates 44-28. And the crazy thing was, if you watch the game, you know that Georgia jumped out to a 14-0 lead. Before you know it, Florida has 38 points. They dominate. They cruise to victory in this game. And so one thing that I think has been pretty consistent with this show that I talk about all the time, guys, is that I like talking the big stories, but sometimes the interesting angle isn't always with the winning team. And so when I look at Florida, Georgia on Saturday, to me, the story isn't really about Florida. I know they were a slight underdog. I know that Vegas actually liked Georgia coming into this game, but I think if you listen to most people, they would tell you that it's hard not to like Florida. Explosive offense, they're healthier, and so Florida comes into this game as, even though they're an underdog, I think most people thought they were going to win. They do win. They win in convincing fashion. And so there's really nothing to say about Florida that hasn't already been said. So instead, the interesting thing to me is Georgia. And the interesting thing to me is talking about them in the bigger picture, and something that I've talked about many times on this show, but I think it crystallized itself on Saturday. And that is the very simple question of, has Georgia already missed its window to compete in the SEC and compete for national championships? And before we get too much into Georgia, it is important to say a couple things that are important for this show. Georgia is really, really, really beat up right now. I understand that they have been devastated by injuries over the last couple weeks, down 3 defensive starters coming into this game. Their best cornerback was in a bike accident, Richard LeCount. Thankfully, he's okay, but from strictly a football perspective, really tough to go play a pass-happy team like Florida and expect to slow them down without your best cornerback. Obviously, we saw the devastating, gruesome injury to the true freshman wide receiver. We hope that he makes a speedy recovery, but that was scary and sad, and frankly, I'm kind of visualizing it as I'm talking about it, and it was very alarming. So, best of luck in recovery to that kid. And then, of course, Stetson Bennett gets hurt at quarterback, and even before he was hurt, the game was over, but then it was really over. And so I think as Georgia fans look in the mirror today, I think they have to kind of look at, independent of the injuries, where are we at as a program? And to me, it kind of goes back to what we just talked about with Michigan a minute ago, which is very simply, not only are we not where we want to be, we're Georgia. We have invested so much into this program. And we're not competing with Clemson. We're not competing with Alabama. We're not competing with Ohio State. But the gap is actually widening. And that is where I would be concerned if I was a Georgia fan, because at the very least, I know that when you go to Georgia, when you are a Georgia fan, when you're Kirby Smart, the expectation is national championship. But at least coming into this game, you could say, well, listen, at least we're winning the SEC East every year, and if you get to the SEC championship game, maybe you'll break through, maybe you'll win it like you did in 2017, and if you win the SEC, you can get to the playoff, and if you can get to the playoff, anything can happen. Now, you're not even the best team in your own division. Dan Mullen is just getting things rolling, and if you're Georgia, the gap is widening between the top of the SEC and you guys, and you got to wonder if you're being left behind. And when I look at Georgia, I think it all comes back down to what I've talked about so many times on this show. It comes back to quarterback, and it comes back to style of play. And again, for the 1,000th time, I will defend Kirby Smart from the perspective that he thought that he had the answer at quarterback in Jamie Newman. Jamie Newman, the transfer from Wake Forest, dual threat guy, decides to opt out of the season. But without Jamie Newman, Georgia is what they have always been under Kirby Smart, which is great running the ball, great on defense, but don't have a dynamic quarterback. And if they can't win a game low scoring, if they can't win it 17-7, 17-10, 17-14, 21-14, they can't beat good teams. And I just think that Kirby Smart is not only stuck in the past, but he's almost playing a different sport altogether, right? It's really funny. The NBA draft is coming up next week. Not a lot of people know that, but that's not really the important part of the conversation. The important part of the conversation is this. I was talking to a college basketball guy the other day. You guys know I love college basketball, but I was talking to a college basketball guy about a certain prospect in the draft, and we were talking about how the sport of college basketball is almost a completely different sport than the NBA. There are guys that struggled in college basketball that aren't even good in college basketball that are having a ton of success at the NBA level because the game of college basketball is basically different than the game of the NBA. And I bring that back to Kirby Smart because it feels like he is playing a sport of football that no longer exists, right? And I've talked about it so much. I don't want to get too deep into it. But look, the sport of college football is evolving into the NFL. What do they say about the NFL? It is a quarterback-driven league. If you don't have a quarterback, you can't win at the highest level, okay? If you don't have Aaron Rodgers, if you don't have Tom Brady, and even Tom Brady's kind of an archaic guy because he can't really run, he can't really make plays with his legs. You don't have Russell Wilson, you don't have Patrick Mahomes, you don't have Lamar Jackson. You cannot win at the highest level. We are now seeing that trickle down to college football. Ohio State, ironically, has former Georgia quarterback Justin Fields. They can win the national championship. Trevor Lawrence, number 1 overall type pick. And if you look at the teams that have made the playoff over the last couple years and had success in the playoff, they are teams that have had NFL caliber quarterbacks. Tua at Alabama, Trevor Lawrence at Clemson, Joe Burrow at LSU, Kyler Murray at Oklahoma, Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma. Say what you want about any one of those guys. I just mentioned 3 number 1 overall picks. I mentioned Tua, who would have been number 1 overall if he was healthy, and I mentioned Trevor Lawrence, who will be number 1 overall last year. If you are not a difference maker, game changer quarterback, you cannot win in college football at this level, and that is the problem where Georgia is at. And at a certain point, it does fall on Kirby Smart. I know you had Jamie Newman. I know you thought it was going to be different this year, but at what point can you stop making excuses? Because you had Justin Fields in the program, you didn't use him. You had Jamie Newman, and I'm just saying, maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but I believe that if Jamie Newman, who's projected as a late round pick, 5th, 6th, 7th round, if he felt like he could play his way into the first round playing under Kirby Smart, I think he would have stuck with college football. Instead, he leaves, and instead we're seeing the same thing. But this is now year 5 for Kirby Smart at Georgia. We've had multiple quarterbacks. We've had multiple offensive coordinators, and it's still the same deal. You run the ball, you play defense, you hope to win low-scoring games. And if I'm Georgia, I'm just freaking out that we've already missed our best window because it comes back to what I said a minute ago. At the beginning, 3, 4, 5 years ago, at least you were competitive. You won the SEC East, you go to the college football playoff, you beat Oklahoma, you lose to Alabama in overtime. Following year, win SEC East, get to Atlanta, have Alabama on the ropes, can't quite get there. Last year, win the SEC East, get smoked by LSU, and now this year, get smoked by Alabama and smoked by Florida. And think about how the landscape of the SEC is changing in the bigger picture. Alabama, this was the year you were supposed to get Alabama. They had a top 5 pick, maybe the most dynamic quarterback they've had since Joe Namath or Kenny Stabler, or whoever came first. Most dynamic quarterback in the history of the program, just left the program last year. They lost 2 first-round wide receivers, Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy. This was the year you're supposed to get Bama. Instead, you could argue Bama's offense is better with Mac Jones, with Steve Sarkisian calling plays. Florida, you had them the last 2 years. Well, now Dan Mullen's got it rolling, and I don't think they're slowing down anytime soon. And if you can't get by those programs, by the way, Jimbo Fisher's got things rolling over at Texas A&M. LSU maybe potentially gets back here or there. What are you at Georgia other than stuck in the mud, stuck in neutral, stuck playing a style of football that worked in 2001 but not in 2020? And so as I think to this Georgia team, it goes back to what I say every time they lose a big game. I talked about it last year with LSU. I talked about it this year with the Alabama game, and I'm going to talk about it again this time around. I understand Georgia had a ton of injuries. And I understand they're a really good program, right? They're kind of like what Michigan was with Jim Harbaugh up until this season. You beat the teams you're supposed to, but you can't get over the hump against the great ones. But at a certain point, you can only bang your head against the wall so many times and not be able to break through. And I just worry as I look around the rest of the SEC. Florida's only going to keep getting better. Bama isn't slowing down because they got another 5-star quarterback behind Mac Jones named Bryce Young, who people think might be better than Mac Jones is in the long term. And if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm worried, I'm concerned, and it falls to Kirby Smart. Because as I said, you've now had multiple quarterbacks. Couldn't figure out a way to get Justin Fields on the field, by the way. Multiple offensive coordinators. And you haven't got the job done. That guy, I don't know if he's in the program. The kid, Dwan Mathis, has struggled when he has played. But I'm freaking out if I'm a Georgia fan.